Max, it's time for our weekly visit with the Hall of Famer. We are joined by the great Craig Way. And Craig, I feel like you and I just can't get away from each other.
You know what? It's interesting you say that, because I thought when I first got punched up on the board to visit with you there, I thought you were, when you were talking about subscription, I thought you were renewing your wedding vows at first. So,
Well,
once you sign up, you can't get away until it's over. That
true.
kind of thing.
It's true. My wife and I are on an annual, mutual option to renew is basically what I like to think of it as.
Kind of like when Walter Austin was managing the Dodgers, even though he won 4 World Series, he had 24 one-year contracts.
Yeah.
And every year he would go back in and say, "Well, I guess we can do it. We can do it one more year." Or like when Tom Landry was coaching the Cowboys, and he used to do the television show with, of course, the voice of the Cowboys, Brad Sham, and they would actually pick NFL games, and they go through all of this stuff, and Coach Landry would say, between Washington and Philadelphia, I think I'll take Philadelphia. And then when they get to the Cowboys, and they say, the Cowboys against the Falcons, he goes, against the Atlanta team, I think I'll stay with us one more week. He would always say, he's going to pick his team one more week to play. So, all that stuff comes to mind.
Craig, we're now we've had enough time, I think, to kind of digest what happened in Week 5 of Texas high school football across the state. Overall, when you kind of take a look back, what are kind of your overall impressions of what we learned in Week 5?
You know what? I think that is the universal question, Ted, that we would all ask of ourselves and that we would all ask of coaches. I just got through doing my radio show a little while ago, and I had Todd Dodge, head coach of Westlake, comes in studio every Wednesday and sits down with me, and they're at 5-0. Now they play Hayes this week before the big showdown with Lake Travis, and then they get their bye week. And I got into this whole stream of consciousness with Hank Carter of Lake Travis yesterday about bye weeks, because their bye week is this week, and many are. But it all rolls back to, what do you like about your team, and what do you are still concerned about as you hit the midway mark? Today being Wednesday, it's kind of, as you guys would know, the midway mark of the midway mark, because here we are at the middle part of the week, and the middle part between weeks 5 and 6, the middle mark of the season. You really couldn't hit the apex any more than you're hitting it right now. So it's a great time for review, and it's a great time for looking back and say what leaps off the page at you. I think it was something you and I visited about on Monday. Some of the usual suspects, it makes absolute sense to talk about Judson and Allen and DeSoto and Westlake, the ones that we expected to be really, really good at the start of the season, in 6A and in 5A, some of the same ones, even though because the Hurricane Harvey pushed back a lot of things. Nevertheless, we're still seeing, Katy in 6A, despite fewer games played, and in 5A with Manville as well. We're seeing a lot of the stuff that we expected to see. Now, having said that, nobody, even the genius that you are, nobody thought Cameron Yo would be 1-4.
Right.
And coming off a loss to McGregor. Nobody thought that we'd see some of the start. Nobody thought, down in the Central Texas area, nobody thought Round Rock would be 0-5.
Yeah.
They went to the state quarterfinals last year and were picked along with Cedar Ridge really as the favorites in District 13 6A. Nobody saw that coming. I don't think anybody saw Smithville at unbeaten at this point of the season coming after a winless campaign. So the ups and downs, I think, have taken folks by surprise, as well as the expected results.
I want to kind of ask you about playoffs. Week 6, though.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I got an email this week from Internet Cyborg Matt Stepp, who sent me his playoff projections for this year, which is insane.
I love it.
That's insane. But I want to ask you, the guru, when do you kind of start crunching playoff scenarios? Because I know that there's a big rush in Week 10 and Week 11. When do you kind of start thinking forward about, okay, this team, I want to do, this team, if they go here, when do you start thinking about that?
Right. It's a great question. And really, I start you mentioned Week 10, which is one of my favorite nights of the year. I always say that the 3 most significant nights or weekends of the year are Week 1, Week 17, and Week 10. Not necessarily Week 11, even though it's great to start the playoffs. who gets in and who gets out, and tiebreakers, and who slides up Division I and D2, and those kinds of things. A lot of that stuff doesn't get determined until that final Friday night of the regular season, which is actually week 11, but it's the 10th week for everybody who is still playing. Now, that said, I start thinking about it when I start seeing key games that impact more than just the two teams involved. I'll give you an example. And you and I talked about this a little bit last week, but down here in the greater Austin area, there's going to be so much attention focused on Westlake and Lake Travis, or Battle of the Hills, Battle of the Lakes, whatever you want to call it. They're going to have this big showdown coming up at Shap Stadium a week from this Friday. Okay, big game, no doubt about it. We know both of those teams are going to the playoffs. We know that barring a colossal collapse, Vandegrift is going to go to the playoffs, while Vandegrift is going to be a Division II team. We know Lake Travis is going to be a Division I team. What we don't know for sure is if Westlake is going to be in Division I or Division II. That's going to come down to a game on October 27th, in my opinion, between Hayes and Vista Ridge. Mm-hmm. And last year there was this three-way tie going into the final night of the regular season, and it was going to be point differentials. And hey, if Hayes gets in there, Westlake drops to the D2 bracket because Hayes will go D1 and all that stuff. And what folks forgot to think about was the fact that Lehman could upset Hayes, which is what happened. Then it came down to a head-to-head, or Lehman could upset Leander. It came down to a head-to-head between Vista Ridge and Leander, or Vista Ridge and Hayes, and it got them in. And what they did was to push Westlake back to the Division I bracket. So I start paying attention to those things as they relate to other districts, and I start scanning that and looking across the state. Now, we know that the number of those types of things is diminished, especially nowadays with just 6A and 5A with that D1, D2 thing, and it's about to change, obviously, out of 5A. So it's really down to just 6A about who slides up, who slides down. But it does still affect who's going to get into the playoffs and who gets left out when you get down to tiebreakers. So in answer, the long-winded answer to your question is it's probably around week 7 and week 8 when I start really zeroing in on those kinds of things.
He's Craig Way, the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer, joins us every Wednesday here on Texas Football Today. Get involved in the conversation, hashtag TF Today. All right, Craig, I'm gonna take a play from your playbook. I'm going to give you 3 teams, 3 big school teams, 6A and 5A, and you have to buy stock in one, knowing full well about how, that you can cash it in at the end of the year, but you got to buy stock in one of these undefeated teams. Which one are you taking? I can give you the option of Dripping Springs. I can give you the option of Smithson Valley, or I can give you the option of A&M Consolidated. Which of those 3 are you buying stock in?
Okay, so I can only have one?
You can only have one. That's the tough part of this game. You do this to me on your show, and I don't like it. So turnabout's fair play.
Yeah, it is. It is. In considering this, the other thing that, in terms of buying stock, does the stock means how deep they go in the postseason, or just how good do I think they are?
Let's say how good you think they are. So even if they have a tougher road to hoe in the playoffs, I want that to be because, look, if one team can coast through into a semifinal, then that's one thing, as opposed to if they run into Allen in week 1, which none of these will, but, round 1, then obviously that would change. Let's just say the team that you are confident is a really, really good team.
Okay. Under those parameters, I'm buying stock in Smithson Valley.
Okay.
First I'm going to buy stock in Larry Hill. If Larry Hill's running a convenience store, I'm buying stock in the convenience store. I feel that strongly about the type of Hall of Fame coach that he is. So you start with that. And the only reason I hesitated is because of what they're going to have to deal with in the postseason, which is going to be a second-round matchup. Remember, last year was Lake Travis. This year it could be Westlake. That it could be, or it might not be. It might be a second-round matchup with Vandegrift or something like that. It might be a little bit different. So that's why I say that, only because of the difficulty of what they might encounter in that second week of the playoffs. Similar situation for Drippin. I certainly completely and 100% believe in what Galen Zimmerman's doing there, and I like that team and that entire district. By the way, is taking the week off. They have a bye week this week, but again, that is a thing where if you get past your bye district, there's a good chance you're running all the way at least to the quarterfinals, as they did a year ago, if not to the Final Four. So that it depends partially on the playoff bracketing and the stuff like that we're talking about. But if we're just buying it in terms of, hey, that's a really good team, all of them are really good teams. If I could only buy one stock on those parameters in one team, it would be Smithson.
All right, I'm going to do the same thing for small school now. I'm going to make you do,
Okay.
I got 3 to 4 and below. You can either buy stock in Graham, Sonora, or Milano. Who are you buying stock in? This one's tough, right? I think this one's tough.
It is. It really is. And Graham really impressed me last week. Well, I would say...
I did it! I stumped him!
Yeah, well, you caught me, but yeah, the old rock and hard place thing. I would say Sonora only because, but the bracketing kind of concerns me there with what they're going to have to deal with in West Texas and the division. Milano is doing a great job of flying under the radar despite beating Bremont and despite cracking the poll this week. They're still, other than, nerdy guys like me and you, there's not a lot of people talking about them. And the bracket may set up for them to have a deep run in there. All that said, give me Graham.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's...
Yeah. I like all three of them.
All right, and finally, we're talking with Craig Way, the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer here on Texas Football Today. Get involved in the conversation, #TF Today. You told me a story... you told us, the gathered masses, in the parking lot at 2:30 in the morning outside Fox Sports Southwest. You told me a great story about how in 1994 you called a really fun Midland Lee Arlington Lamar game. And I am going to make you tell that story to the masses because that might be my favorite Craig Way story I've ever heard.
Well, first of all, let me see if I can remember what I talked about at 2:30 in the morning in the parking lot. No. It is a true story. I was, in those days, the way the high school football radio postseason was set up. Once you got to the third round, the rights, and to a certain extent it still works this way, but not quite in the same. There's one major difference. But the rights revert to a rights holder. In this day and age, you have that, but the local stations can still engineer and generate and originate their own broadcast. They just have to, I guess, comply with sponsorship things and stuff like that. Well, in those days, once you got to the third round, if your radio station had been carrying a school all year long, you could continue to do so, but you weren't doing the broadcast unless you were designated by the radio network that was run out of Amarillo. You carried a network broadcast. Well, I was one of those, quote-unquote, network broadcasters, and they would send us to different places. I got some dirty looks in the Friday Night Lights year of '88 when they sent me out to Odessa to do Permian and Arlington Lamar, that kind of thing, because it wasn't their guys doing it back then. So there was some of that. Well, I was supposed to do one game, and then at the like on Wednesday, like today would be a game week, I got called and said, hey, the West Texas crew, they got problems, somebody's ill or out or something, and can't do Midland Lee and Arlington Lamar. Would you go out to Midland and do that, and we can get another crew to do that game in the Metroplex? And I said, sure, I'll do it. So I hop in the car with our good friend Roger Emmerich, who went out there to do the game between Midland Lee and Arlington Lamar. Wonderful game, 29-29 tie in the third round of the playoffs, and it wound up going to the second tiebreaker back then. Of course, we know about 20-yard line penetrations. The second tiebreaker was total first downs. Lee had an edge in that. Rebels advanced after that 29-29 tie. So it was this wonderful game. I get in the car. I come back. I'm getting close to the Metroplex, and that game I was going to do. Let me flip on and catch the end of it. I did. The end of that game was John Tyler in Plano East. Great gosh almighty, Joe Friday. And by the way, We say that with homage and paying respects to the family of the late Denny Garber, who passed away yesterday, who was on the broadcast crew of that, along with Eddie Clinton and former coach Mike Zaputo. I was due to call that game for radio and then got switched off or asked to switch off. And I'm like, sure, I'll do it. Plato East and JT's probably going to win the game handily anyway. Sure. And they were up 41-17, as we know, with 3.5 minutes to go before the world turned upside down.
Wow.
That's
amazing.
I told Max in before the show, I said, I'm going to make Craig tell you one of the most amazing high school football broadcast stories I've ever heard. And it lived up. Now, here's the thing, though, is that you're exactly right. It's not like Lee and Lamar was a stinker. It's a great game.
Yeah.
It was. It's one of the better games that no one has any recollection of. I know you guys don't. No recollection of it because of Plano East John Tyler, which was a 41-17 ball game with 3.5 minutes to go, and it winds up being 48-44.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an unbelievable game. And I'll say now what I said in that parking lot last Friday night, Tip. I feel like Paul Harvey, and now you know the rest of the story. Good day.
It's like what is the second biggest thing that happened in Dallas the day that the Cowboys won the Super Bowl? Like, nobody knows. You know what I mean? It's lost in the ether. He is Craig Way. He's the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer. Make sure you see his fine work both on 104.9 The Horn in Austin as well as on Fox Sports Southwest on High School Scoreboard Live, 11 o'clock. And Craig, I will see you then. Thanks as always for your time.
Looking forward to it on Friday, Tip.
All righty. There he goes, Craig Way, the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer. I told you that was a great story.
That's pretty great.
You. And he told it in the exact same way. And, you know,
Yeah.
in the way that he's like, oh, so they switch us. We thought that the Metroplex game was probably going to be a blowout, so it's like, okay, fine, we'll go out there. And, you know, he goes out there and, yeah, he missed out calling, like, the greatest high school football game of all time.
Wow.
Told you.